The bells of St. George's tolled with a solemnity that seemed almost cruel in its grandeur, their iron voices echoing through Hanover Square as though announcing not merely a marriage, but a judgment. Carriages rattled to a halt in ordered lines, each bearing ladies in silks and gentlemen in coats of impeccable cut, their powdered wigs gleaming beneath the September sun. The scent of horseflesh mingled with lavender sachets tucked into reticules, and everywhere there was the murmur of expectation. London's finest had gathered to witness the long-anticipated union of Lady Eleanor Whitcomb and the Duke of Harwood, a match whispered over in drawing-rooms since their infancy. The day promised not only the binding of two noble houses but also the preservation of estates, influence, and pride. Lady Eleanor, within the vestry of the church, stood like a figure painted upon porcelain, her gown of ivory satin cascading in perfect folds about her feet. Her veil, trimmed in Brussels lace, quivered with the faintest of tremors, betraying the turbulence within her breast. Though she had been taught from the cradle that duty eclipsed desire, there lingered in her dark eyes a question that no tutor had ever answered: what place was there for affection in a life so carefully arranged by others? She had seen little of the Duke since childhood, their conversations reduced to polite exchanges at balls, his gloved hand briefly touching hers during quadrilles. Yet she had not despised the prospect of their marriage. To be Duchess of Harwood was a role of consequence, to ensure her family's security was a noble sacrifice. Or so she had repeated to herself, even when the silence of her chamber pressed in like a cage. The church stirred as the Duke entered, tall and commanding, his uniform of navy and gold catching the morning light. His reputation was one of ambition rather than tenderness, yet society admired his calculated brilliance. Mothers angled their daughters toward him at every assembly until his betrothal was made public. Now, as he strode with the measured authority of a man accustomed to admiration, the crowd leaned closer, eager to record each gesture in memory for the sake of future gossip. Eleanor's heart, though subdued, fluttered at the sight of him, perhaps not with love, but with the solemn anticipation of destiny finally unfolding. Charlotte Whitcomb, Eleanor's younger sister, stood among the bridesmaids, her complexion bright with the bloom of 19 summers. Where Eleanor was composed and grave, Charlotte shone with unstudied vivacity. She laughed easily, spoke with artless candor, and charmed even the most cynical of London's circles. Eleanor loved her sister with the protective devotion of an elder, though she sometimes winced at Charlotte's reckless candor. Still, she never envied her. Eleanor's path was fixed, Charlotte's was yet to be determined. Such distinctions were the order of things. The procession commenced. Organ notes swelled like a tide, drawing Eleanor forward upon her father's arm. The nave of St. George's glittered with candlelight striking gilt woodwork, the congregation turning in perfect unison to behold her progress. Every face was alight with curiosity, every whisper muffled beneath the swell of music. Eleanor kept her gaze steady, her spine unbending, though her heart knocked as though wishing to escape. At the altar, she paused before the Duke, meeting his eyes with what she hoped was serenity. Yet something in those eyes disquieted her. They were restless, glancing not at her but beyond her, to the place where Charlotte stood among the bridesmaids. Eleanor's breath caught, though she told herself it was mere fancy. The vicar's voice began its solemn cadence, words of covenant and promise. The Duke's responses, however, faltered, his gaze returning again and again to the radiant figure of her sister. A murmur swept through the congregation, subtle but perceptible, like wind disturbing the surface of water. Eleanor felt heat rise within her cheeks, her grip tightening upon the bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands. When the moment came for the Duke to pledge his troth, he hesitated. The silence lengthened, unnatural and heavy. The vicar, bewildered, repeated the question, and then, in a voice that carried with terrible clarity to the furthest pew, the Duke spoke not of Eleanor but of Charlotte. "I cannot," he declared, his words echoing beneath the vaulted roof. "My heart belongs elsewhere. I would bind myself in honesty, not falsehood. It is Charlotte Whitcomb I would claim as wife." The church erupted, not in applause but in a torrent of horrified whispers, gasps, and exclamations. Fans snapped open, canes tapped in agitation, and all at once the air was thick with scandal. Eleanor stood as if turned to stone, her world collapsing in the span of a single sentence. She could not look at Charlotte, who gave a stifled cry, nor at her parents, whose faces bore the pallor of ruin. The bouquet slipped from Eleanor's fingers, roses scattering upon the flagstones like bloodless wounds. Time slowed. The whispers swelled into a storm that battered her from every side. She imagined the caricatures already forming in the minds of satirists, the cruel lines to be printed in tomorrow's broadsheets. She saw the future of her family teetering upon the precipice, their name forever tied to disgrace. Yet above all she felt the piercing ache of betrayal, not for lost love, for she had not loved the Duke, but for the public stripping of her dignity, the exposure of her soul before the ruthless gaze of society. Her knees weakened. A hand, she knew not whose, reached to steady her, but the pressure of so many eyes drove her downward. Darkness closed about her as she fainted, her veil spreading like a shroud upon the cold stone. Gasps echoed anew, and the organ's notes faltered into silence. When Eleanor awoke, it was within the vestry once more, the sound of hurried voices surrounding her. Her mother pressed a vial of salts to her nose, her father's jaw was clenched in silent fury, and Charlotte wept at a distance, torn between shame and desire. No word of comfort was offered, only the heavy weight of expectation. Eleanor must endure. The ceremony was abandoned, the congregation dismissed in scandalous wonder, and already the rumor of her disgrace flew upon every tongue through London's streets. Eleanor, pale and trembling, straightened her shoulders. Within her heart, humiliation and sorrow battled, yet a quiet ember of defiance stirred. She had been undone before an altar, stripped of the role she had been trained all her life to fulfill. But somewhere, buried beneath the shame, there flickered the thought that if destiny had been shattered, then perhaps, just perhaps, she might one day forge another. And thus the day that should have crowned her duchess instead cast her adrift, a figure marked by scandal, abandoned at the altar yet not entirely broken. For though the church doors closed upon whispers and the bells tolled with mocking cheer, Eleanor's story had only just begun. London did not sleep in the days that followed the shattered ceremony. It thrived on whispers, each drawing-room a theater where Eleanor's name was spoken with half-shocked, half-delighted relish. The caricaturists of Fleet Street, ever merciless in their appetite, wasted no time. By the second morning, broadsheets carried crude sketches of the Duke leading Charlotte away from the altar, while poor Eleanor was depicted as a wilted rose, petals falling at her feet. The Whitcomb family, once considered steady if not dazzling, now became the epicenter of ridicule. Invitations ceased, callers arrived only to gawk, and her father retreated into his study with a decanter, unwilling to meet the eyes of those who pitied him. Eleanor bore her disgrace in silence. She kept to her chamber, curtains drawn, the hum of the city muffled by heavy drapes. Yet even in seclusion, reminders of betrayal pressed upon her. On her dressing table lay the ribbon she had once tied around the Duke's wrist as a token during a childhood fete, an innocent gesture she had nearly forgotten. Now, cruelly, she found that same ribbon adorning Charlotte's hair when her sister returned from promenades with the Duke. No accusation passed Eleanor's lips, but her heart tightened each time the silk caught the light, a silent mockery of promises once made and carelessly discarded. Charlotte herself was a study in contradictions. She flushed with guilt when near Eleanor, offering timid apologies that faltered beneath the weight of her own happiness. For she was undeniably happy, or at least intoxicated by the attention now lavished upon her as the Duke's chosen bride. Her laughter rang through the halls, a melody that once had been innocent but now grated against Eleanor's ears. It was not malice that guided Charlotte, but youthful recklessness, a dangerous thoughtlessness that society was quick to excuse because beauty excused all. Eleanor could not summon hatred for her sister, but the sting of betrayal ran deep, and every smile Charlotte offered felt like salt upon the wound. The Whitcombs' fortune suffered. Merchants grew wary, creditors pressed, and suitors who once eyed Eleanor as a prize now turned their attentions elsewhere. Her mother, consumed by bitterness, urged Eleanor to hide her face until scandal had dulled. Yet Eleanor, wounded though she was, found solace in solitary walks through the gardens at twilight. There, away from the prying eyes of society, she wrestled with her humiliation, testing the fragile boundaries of her pride. It was during one such evening, beneath the lengthening shadows of elm trees, that she first encountered the Marquis of Ashcombe. Lord Ashcombe was no stranger to society, though he bore its company with a detachment that verged upon disdain. Widowed young, his name was spoken in tones that mingled admiration with wariness. He was wealthy, certainly, and of impeccable lineage, yet his manner discouraged idle flattery. Some whispered he was cold, others that grief had carved away his warmth. Eleanor, when she glimpsed him seated upon a stone bench, a book balanced upon his knee, thought only that he seemed at once apart from the world and entirely attuned to its cruelties. Their first exchange was unremarkable in words yet memorable in impression. He rose, bowed with deliberate courtesy, and remarked upon the lateness of the hour for solitary walks. Eleanor replied that scandal made solitude preferable to society. At this, something flickered in his expression, not amusement, but recognition, as though he too knew the weight of whispered judgment. Their conversation was brief, restrained, yet when Eleanor returned to the house that night, she found her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Days passed, and their encounters grew more frequent. Whether by chance or quiet intention, Lord Ashcombe appeared at assemblies, in the park, and once in the reading-room of Hatched's, where Eleanor had retreated for solace among the shelves. His presence was never obtrusive. Rather, he moved with the assurance of one who saw without demanding to be seen. He offered her books with discreetly marked passages, words underlined that seemed chosen not by accident but as messages hidden in plain sight. She puzzled over his motives. Was he drawn to her scandal because it mirrored his own disillusion, or did he truly perceive in her something worth defending? Meanwhile, society sharpened its knives. At a masquerade held in Grosvenor Square, Eleanor attended at her mother's insistence, though she longed to vanish into obscurity. Draped in silver gauze, masked and vulnerable, she moved through the throng like a ghost, enduring sly glances and whispered laughter behind fans. It was there she saw Charlotte and the Duke, resplendent, their triumph flaunted as though the altar itself had blessed their betrayal. Eleanor's breath caught, her shame renewed with merciless force. Yet in that same instant, Lord Ashcombe stepped from the shadows, his mask concealing half his face, his voice low but unmistakably steady. "Ruins, my lady, make the strongest foundations." The words struck Eleanor with a force greater than their simplicity. They did not console, nor did they pity, they challenged. She turned to him, her lips parted, but before she could answer, another guest swept between them, and he was gone. That night, as she returned to her chamber, Eleanor clutched the memory of his words as though they were a talisman. For the first time since the altar, she felt something stir within her that was not humiliation but possibility. Still, she remained cautious. The heart already scarred once cannot easily trust again. The scandal, however, refused to fade. Pamphlets now speculated openly on Eleanor's supposed coldness, suggesting it was her lack of charm that drove the Duke to her sister. Caricatures depicted her as a statue of ice while Charlotte, ever radiant, basked in warmth. Eleanor endured it with outward composure, yet in private she wept. She found the discarded bouquet of roses, long withered, still lying in the drawer where she had hidden it. In that brittle ruin she saw a reflection of herself, cast aside yet not utterly destroyed. And so the days lengthened into weeks, each bringing fresh indignities, each forcing Eleanor to confront not only the cruelty of others but the truths within her own heart. She had been raised to obey, to yield, to fulfill a role defined by birth and expectation. Now, stripped of that role, she faced the terrifying freedom of choosing what remained. The ribbon in Charlotte's hair, the laughter of society, the quiet gestures of Lord Ashcombe, all pressed upon her, demanding that she decide whether she would sink beneath disgrace or rise from it. As autumn deepened, Eleanor walked once more through the gardens, her steps unhurried, her breath steady in the crisp air. She carried no bouquet, wore no token, but in her heart there burned a question that had no easy answer. Could ruin indeed become the beginning of something stronger? She did not yet know. But as the wind stirred the last of the roses from their branches, she felt, for the first time, that she wished to learn. The autumn rains descended upon London with relentless persistence, veiling the city in a grey melancholy that mirrored Eleanor's inner world. Each morning, she rose to find her name still laced within the columns of gossip, her image distorted by the pens of pamphleteers who thrived upon scandal. Yet with every cruel depiction, she found her heart hardening, as though humiliation had forged a shield rather than a wound. She no longer trembled when her maid delivered broadsheets. She skimmed them with a cold detachment, then consigned them to the fire. Beneath the ashes of disgrace, something steady was being born. It was on one such rain-soaked day that Lord Ashcombe called at the Whitcomb residence. The house had grown accustomed to a silence broken only by Charlotte's laughter and their mother's reproaches, but his arrival unsettled the air. He was announced with proper ceremony, yet even the footman's voice carried a note of curiosity, as though everyone in the household longed to know why a man of his stature sought Eleanor's company. When he entered the drawing-room, his presence carried a gravity that no storm could diminish. He removed his gloves with measured care, his eyes resting upon Eleanor with a steadiness that unsettled her composure. Their conversation began with civility, the polite phrases demanded by society. Yet soon, beneath the rhythm of rain striking the windows, his tone shifted. "I have heard it said that disgrace defines us more truly than triumph," he murmured, his gaze fixed upon the fire. "But I have found that disgrace can strip away falsehoods, leaving only what is real." Eleanor, seated with her hands folded tightly in her lap, felt a tremor pass through her. "And what, my lord, have you discovered to be real?" He turned then, and for a moment his expression softened. "That you endure with a dignity most cannot fathom. That strength, Lady Eleanor, is rarer than beauty, rarer than fortune." His words struck deep. Eleanor's pride, long bruised, stirred at the recognition. She looked away, her throat tight with unspoken emotion. It was not admiration she heard in his tone, but something more dangerous, respect woven with the threads of longing. She had learned to fear such threads, yet could not deny the warmth they ignited. Their meetings thereafter unfolded with a rhythm both careful and inevitable. At assemblies, he sought her out though whispers followed them. In gardens, he walked beside her at a pace that matched her own, as though attuned to her every step. He never pressed her with flattery. Instead, he listened, and in that listening, Eleanor felt seen in a way she never had been before. One evening, as a storm battered the city, Eleanor found herself in the Whitcomb library. The fire crackled weakly against the wind, and she sought solace among the shelves where forgotten volumes offered silent companionship. She reached for a book of poetry, only to discover it already opened, a slip of paper marking a passage. The handwriting upon the margin was unmistakable. Lord Ashcombe's bold script underlined a line that read, "Asterisk, from ruined stone, the heart may carve its truest dwelling." Asterisk. Her breath caught. She closed the book swiftly, her cheeks warm, but before she could retreat, the door opened. Lord Ashcombe entered, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "I thought I might find you here," he said quietly, as though confessing rather than declaring. The silence stretched, taut and shimmering. Eleanor clutched the book to her chest. "You presume much, my lord, to inscribe words not your own." "Forgive me," he replied, stepping closer. "I sought only to share what I could not speak aloud in the presence of others. Words written may reach where words spoken might falter." Her heart pounded with a ferocity she had not known at the altar. She should have dismissed him, should have called for her maid, yet she did neither. Instead, she raised her gaze to his, the unspoken weight between them heavy with possibility. For a moment, the firelight seemed to draw them nearer, shadows merging, breaths entwining. His hand lifted, as though to brush a stray curl from her brow, but the creak of footsteps in the corridor shattered the moment. They stepped apart, Eleanor's pulse racing, Ashcombe's face settling once more into the mask of restraint. In the days that followed, she wrestled with the memory of that near touch. The world already buzzed with speculation, suggesting impropriety where none existed. If she allowed herself to succumb, would she not confirm every cruel whisper? Yet in her heart, she could not banish the image of his eyes upon hers, steady and unyielding. Charlotte, meanwhile, flourished in her role as the Duke's bride-to-be. She paraded through drawing rooms with jewels upon her throat and laughter upon her lips, seemingly oblivious to the devastation left in her wake. Eleanor could not decide whether to pity or resent her, for Charlotte's gaiety seemed as fragile as glass, dazzling yet hollow. Their exchanges grew strained. Every word between them carried the weight of betrayal unspoken. One afternoon, Eleanor and Lord Ashcombe crossed paths in Hyde Park. The autumn leaves lay thick upon the ground, and the air was sharp with cold. He bowed with formality, yet when he straightened, his eyes held urgency. "There are truths we dare not speak in crowded halls," he said lowly, "but if you permit, I would speak them now." She hesitated, glancing around. The path was nearly deserted, the distant hum of carriages muffled by trees. "Then speak, my lord, and let it be done." He drew a breath, his voice steady though laced with fervor. "You believe yourself ruined, and yet I tell you, Eleanor, you are the only soul in London who still commands my respect. I cannot watch you suffer under falsehoods without offering the truth. I admire you, not despite your disgrace, but because of how you endure it." Her steps faltered. The weight of his declaration pressed upon her, both intoxicating and terrifying. "Admiration is but another word for pity," she said, though her voice trembled. "No," he replied swiftly. "Pity sees weakness. I see strength, and strength such as yours compels the heart to reverence." The words hung between them, raw and dangerous. Eleanor turned away, her composure fraying. She could not trust herself to answer, for in her heart a storm raged, fear of scandal, fear of betrayal, and yet beneath it all, a fragile, undeniable hope. That night, as she lay wakeful in her chamber, she replayed his words again and again. Each syllable struck like a spark against the cold walls of her heart. She had been abandoned at the altar, mocked by society, betrayed by her own sister. And yet here was a man who saw not her ruin but her resilience. Could she dare believe in his sincerity? Could she allow herself the risk of hope? The rain beat upon the windows, steady as a drum, as Eleanor resolved nothing and everything all at once. For though her lips had spoken denial, her heart whispered a dangerous truth. She longed to hear him speak those words again. Winter descended upon London with a severity that rendered the city both dazzling and cruel. Frost gilded the windows of carriages, lamps sputtered beneath a veil of mist, and the Thames itself seemed to shiver beneath its icy cloak. Within this frozen world, Eleanor moved with the composure of one long practiced in restraint, though her heart wrestled with emotions that defied such discipline. Every whisper of Lord Ashcombe's words echoed within her, each glance across a ballroom seared itself upon her memory, until the boundary between dignity and longing blurred to near dissolution. Yet if her heart warmed to his presence, society's gaze grew colder with each passing day. The gossip had taken on new venom. Where once the ridicule concerned her abandonment, now it turned toward her supposed entanglement with Ashcombe. Pamphlets insinuated meetings in secluded gardens. Caricatures depicted her clutching the hem of his coat like a desperate supplicant. Eleanor read them with an outward calm that concealed the storm within. She feared for her family's already fragile reputation, yet she could not deny the thrill that coursed through her whenever Ashcombe appeared at her side, a silent challenge to every sneer and smirk. It was at Lady Penheth's ball that the scandal reached its sharpest point. The house glittered with candlelight, each chandelier blazing as though determined to rival the stars themselves. Musicians played with fervor, their melodies weaving through the air like threads of silk. Eleanor entered with measured steps, her gown of deep emerald lending her a dignity that no whisper could tarnish. Yet she felt the eyes upon her, the weight of their judgment pressing against her skin like frostbite. Charlotte was there too, radiant beside the Duke, her laughter ringing across the room with careless triumph. Eleanor's heart clenched, but she did not falter. She had endured greater humiliations than the hollow mockery of smiles. Then, across the crowded ballroom, Lord Ashcombe appeared. He stood with his usual composure, his figure commanding without ostentation, his gaze steady upon her as though no one else existed. A silence seemed to fall within Eleanor, a pause in which the world narrowed to a single possibility. With deliberate grace, he crossed the room, every step a defiance of society's dictates. The crowd parted as though compelled by some invisible force, curiosity sparking in their eyes. He bowed deeply before her, his voice low yet carrying with clarity. "My lady, may I have this dance?" The hush that followed was deafening. Eleanor felt her breath catch, her entire body alight with the tension of 1,000 watching eyes. To accept would be to court further scandal, to place herself upon the very edge of ruin. Yet to refuse would be to deny the truth that beat within her chest. For a moment, she wavered between the dictates of pride and the pull of desire. And then, with a steadiness she scarcely believed herself capable of, she placed her hand in his. The music resumed, but to Eleanor it seemed transformed, no longer mere notes but a current that carried her into uncharted waters. Ashcombe's hand was firm upon hers, his movements precise yet infused with a subtle tenderness that spoke volumes. They glided across the floor, every turn and step a declaration that could not be contained by words. Around them, whispers erupted like sparks from a fire, but Eleanor no longer heard them. She heard only the steady cadence of his breath, the unspoken vow in his gaze. As they moved, he leaned nearer, his words scarcely audible above the swell of violins. "Let them look. Let them gossip. I have found my truth in you, Eleanor." Her heart faltered, then surged. She longed to reply, yet words failed her. The dance itself became her answer, each step a silent confession of what she dared not speak aloud. When at last the music ended, applause rang hollow in her ears, drowned by the pounding of her pulse. Ashcombe released her hand only when propriety demanded, but the lingering warmth of his touch branded her with its promise. The remainder of the evening passed in a haze of whispers and stares. Eleanor withdrew to the edge of the room, her composure fragile yet intact. She could not deny the exhilaration that had filled her, but neither could she ignore the consequences. The Duke, affronted by the display, approached with Charlotte upon his arm, his expression cold as marble. "You disgrace yourself further, Lady Eleanor," he murmured, his voice sharp enough to cut. "London will not forgive such brazen impropriety." Eleanor met his gaze with quiet defiance. "London has not forgiven me since the day you cast me aside. What more is there to lose?" His eyes narrowed, but before he could reply, Ashcombe stepped forward. "It is not disgrace to stand with dignity," he said evenly. "It is cowardice to condemn what one envies." The words, though spoken softly, carried a weight that silenced even the Duke. Charlotte, flushed with discomfort, tugged her husband's sleeve, and together they retreated, leaving behind a murmur of astonishment that rippled through the crowd. Later, as Eleanor prepared to depart, a folded letter was pressed discreetly into her hand. She recognized the crest instantly, Ashcombe's seal, stamped in wax. Her heart leapt, though she concealed the paper swiftly within her glove. That night, alone in her chamber, she broke the seal and unfolded the page. His handwriting, bold and unmistakable, spilled across the parchment with uncharacteristic urgency. He confessed not merely admiration but devotion, laying bare his heart with a candor that defied restraint. He spoke of loneliness endured, of finding in her a strength that rekindled his belief in truth, in partnership, in the possibility of a love untainted by arrangement or ambition. "I seek not to rescue you," he wrote, "but to walk beside you. If society condemns us, let it. I would rather endure its scorn with you than its favor without you." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she read, each word searing itself into her soul. Never had anyone spoken to her with such honesty, never had her dignity been so fiercely defended. Yet fear lingered still, fear of surrendering her heart once more, fear of the ruin such a union might bring upon her already battered family. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest as though it might steady her racing pulse. The city outside slumbered beneath frost and shadow, but within Eleanor, a fire stirred that refused to be extinguished. For the first time, she glimpsed not only survival but the possibility of joy. Yet with that joy came risk, the certainty that her next choice would shape the rest of her life. She sat long into the night, the letter warm against her palm, torn between caution and longing, between silence and surrender. When at last she rose, her reflection in the glass appeared altered, no longer the girl humiliated at the altar, no longer the sister eclipsed by Charlotte's brightness, but a woman on the brink of her own destiny. She did not yet know if she possessed the courage to seize it, but she knew with aching clarity that the choice was hers alone. And with that knowledge came a strange, intoxicating freedom. The days following the ball unfolded with a tension so taut that every hour seemed to quiver under its weight. Eleanor carried Lord Ashcombe's letter close, hidden within her escritoire, yet its words haunted her every thought. They followed her in the quiet of morning prayers, in the rustle of gowns through the corridors, in the hollow laughter that drifted from Charlotte's apartments. Never before had she been offered such devotion, unconditional, uncalculated, spoken not for gain but from the marrow of sincerity. And yet never before had she been so acutely aware of what it might cost her. For love, though sweet, was a dangerous currency in a society that measured worth in rank and reputation. Her mother's reproaches sharpened daily. "You must not indulge in further folly," Lady Whitcomb insisted, her eyes flashing with weary bitterness. "Our family's name is barely intact. Do you wish to grind it fully into the dust? Ashcombe's attention, though flattering, will not mend what is broken. Better to preserve your dignity in silence than invite another scandal." Eleanor listened, head bowed, though her heart bristled. Silence, she thought, had preserved nothing. Silence had allowed the Duke to humiliate her, had emboldened society to mock her, had rendered her family fragile and trembling before the judgment of others. Yet even as defiance rose within her, she hesitated. To answer Ashcombe's letter would be to step across an invisible boundary, one that once crossed could never be undone. Charlotte, for her part, avoided Eleanor's eyes. Though she swanned through the house adorned with jewels bestowed by the Duke, her gaiety was forced. She could not hide the way her laughter faltered when Ashcombe's name was mentioned, nor the shadow that crossed her face when she glimpsed Eleanor alone with a book or a walk in the garden. Charlotte was no fool. She sensed the shift, though whether it was guilt or envy that troubled her, Eleanor could not tell. Their once cherished sisterhood had fractured beyond repair, each word between them stiff, each glance a reminder of wounds too deep to heal. One afternoon, while the frost still lingered upon the windows, Eleanor received a note delivered by a discreet hand. It bore no crest, yet the script was unmistakable, Ashcombe's, urgent yet elegant. It asked only for a meeting, nothing more, in the gardens of Holland House where the winter roses clung stubbornly to their branches despite the chill. Her pulse quickened as she read, torn between dread and longing. To meet him would be reckless, but to refuse might extinguish a flame she could no longer bear to deny. The appointed day dawned pale and brittle, the sky a thin wash of silver. Eleanor wrapped herself in a cloak and slipped away, her heart pounding with each step. The gardens lay quiet, the air sharp with cold, and there upon the path he waited. Ashcombe removed his hat as she approached, his eyes alive with an intensity that banished the frost. "I feared you would not come," he said softly. "I nearly did not," she admitted, her voice scarcely more than a breath. For a moment they stood in silence, the world around them hushed, as though all creation waited upon their words. Then Ashcombe stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. "Eleanor, I will not clothe my heart in riddles. I love you. Not as society loves, with calculation and ambition, but as a man stripped bare of pretense. I ask not for obedience, nor for sacrifice. I ask only that you walk beside me, whatever storms may follow." Her throat tightened. No declaration had ever sounded so dangerous, so liberating. She wished to answer, yet fear coiled within her. "Do you not see what ruin we invite?" she whispered. "The city already condemns me. To bind yourself to me would invite their scorn as well." His expression softened, though his voice carried steel. "Let them scorn. Their approval is a coin I no longer value. What I seek cannot be given by society. It can only be given by you." The force of his sincerity broke through her defenses. Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes, though she held them back. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life not defined by others' expectations but by her own choosing, a life where love outweighed propriety, where dignity sprang not from obedience but from truth. And yet, even as hope unfurled within her, a shadow intruded. The Duke of Harwood himself, accompanied by Charlotte, appeared upon the path, their presence as chilling as the winter air. His face darkened at the sight of Eleanor and Ashcombe together, and Charlotte's cheeks flushed scarlet. "So it is true," the Duke said coldly. "London's whispers have not exaggerated. You parade your disgrace openly, Lady Eleanor, dragging down with you any man foolish enough to entertain your company." Ashcombe stepped forward, his voice steady. "Enough. You forfeited the right to speak her name with disdain the moment you betrayed her trust. It is not Eleanor who parades disgrace. It is you, who placed selfish desire above honor." Charlotte gasped, her eyes darting between them, torn between shame and defiance. Eleanor stood rooted, her heart pounding with a mingling of terror and relief. At last, someone had spoken aloud the truth she had borne in silence. The Duke sneered, but there was no victory in his gaze, only wounded pride. With a curt gesture, he turned, leading Charlotte away without another word. Their retreat left a silence that seemed to cleanse the air itself, as though the garden had cast off a shadow. Eleanor exhaled, trembling. "You should not have spoken so boldly. He will not forget such an insult." "I do not care what he remembers," Ashcombe replied. "What matters is what you remember, that you are not alone in this battle." The word struck her with a resonance that could not be denied. For so long, she had borne her disgrace as a solitary burden. Now, for the first time, she glimpsed the possibility of partnership, of strength shared rather than endured in silence. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not merely the Marquis society gossiped about, but the man whose heart had chosen hers. Her answer, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. "Then let us walk forward together, whatever storms may come." Ashcombe's hand closed gently over hers, firm yet reverent, as though sealing a covenant spoken not before altar or priest but before the cold winter sky itself. The world might yet conspire against them, but within that clasped hand Eleanor felt a steadiness stronger than any ridicule. For the first time since the bells of St. George's had tolled in cruel mockery, she did not feel broken. She felt whole. As they left the garden side by side, the frost still clinging to the roses, Eleanor knew her path would never be free of whispers. Yet now, whispers no longer defined her. She had chosen, and in choosing, she had claimed a freedom greater than any title, any alliance, any fleeting approval. Her story, once marked by humiliation, now turned toward a new horizon, uncertain, perilous, but undeniably her own.